Hey guys, how are y'all doing today? I said, how are you all? Not how are y'all. Not Mexican. Yeah, I've came upon a fan fiction called The Spell to Happiness. Now, it's not pleasure-like. Oh, I haven't really gotten that far into the story, but I haven't done anything like this in a while. So I'm going to, well, read it for you. For all I know, it's made by Silv SLRVERTIGO. Pretty sure that means Silver Tigo. Silver Tigo. Now, see, it looks like it has pretty good rating, so it's pretty good. So I will be reading it for you. The sun was throwing an orange light across her bedroom wall, slowly growing darker as the sun set. Twilight torn flared briefly, a purple glow lighting the room as she lit candles all across her bedroom. Before her lay a leather-bound book with 2 golden stars on it and a swirl pattern embroidered on it. She had sat here upon her bed for most of the day studying the new book that Princess Celestia had sent her. There were so many spells in the book, it was almost causing her to drool over the pages. She traced her hoof over a page, reading silently to herself. The title at the top of the page simply read Invisibility. Yet the young mare couldn't quite understand the theory behind the spell. It seemed to force light around herself, rendering herself completely unseen. She decided that the best way to see how the spell worked was to test it. She stood up with a small sigh, trotting to the center of her bedroom, a light magenta glow throwing shadows across the room at her horn lit up. She gasped as the cold feeling of water swept over her, followed by the feeling of being air-dried rapidly. A bell rang downstairs as she heard the front door open, a draft of wind sweeping around the room, making her candles flicker before standing strong once again. Twilight, I'm home, Spike called upstairs. Her ear twitched toward the door briefly, before turning her attention back to the book before her. I'm upstairs, she called, smiling briefly as she heard his tiny footsteps walking around downstairs. The mare looked down, frowning slightly as she saw her hooves still quite clearly pressed against the ground. I guess I did it wrong, she sighed quietly, levitating the book over to her, flipping the invisibility spell once again. She reread the chapter a few times, unable to find any reason that the spell would have failed. A moment later, Spike walked into her bedroom, his eyes sweeping the room as he looked for his unicorn friend. Twi, the purple dragon said quietly as he stepped further into the room. I need to talk to you. I'm right here, Spike, Twilight huffed, her eyes locked in her book still. She heard Spike sucking a breath, his claws clicking slightly as he started rubbing his hands together, looking around the room once again. Where? Spike's eyes were wide and he was ready to run at a moment's notice. Twilight looked up, finally catching the waver in her assistant's voice. She narrowed her eyes as she waved her hoof inches from his face, a smile creeping onto her face as his eyes walked right through her. Twilight lowered herself to the ground, a slight smirk on her stout. Boo! She screamed, stomping her hoofs against the floor. Spike shot a foot into the air, and before the mare could blink, her assistant had turned tail and bolted down the stairs and the door, screaming about a ghost the entire time. Twilight collapsed onto her back, laughing until tears came to her eyes. Finally, she sat up smiling, finally understanding what the fuss about pranking was. She just apologized to Spike when he turned, but for now, she could only think of the prank she could pull next day. So first we learn, Twilight is invisible. Well, she is invisible. She didn't think she was invisible until she pranked Spike, in which Spike did not know she had done that. Spike didn't return for the rest of the night, so the next morning found Twilight walking around Ponyville looking for her draconian friend. She had already visited his usual haunts, and the only place she hadn't visited yet was the quarry Rarity and Spike visited when they were jewel hunting. She bet he would be there, probably with Rarity, as the white pony hadn't been in her boutique either. So Twilight set off, heading to the quarry past Sweet Apple Acres. As she trotted down the trail leading out of the town toward her fellow Element of Harmony's farm, she found herself giggling at his panicked expression the day before. She felt a twinge of regret that he hadn't returned home, so she could explain that it was just a practical joke. But as soon as she saw him, she would apologize. Her thoughts were broken as she heard the familiar sound of hooves hitting bark from the field to her left. She stepped off the trail and glanced into the trees, where she could barely see the orange flank of Applejack. She was busy trying to round up the last bit of apples in time for the start of cider season. Twilight grinned as an idea popped into her head, and within seconds she had recast her new spell and hopped over the fence, slowly making her way toward Applejack. She soon came into the sight of the farmer pony, who was so busy bucking. Twilight could have probably walked up without the spell and still been invisible. Seconds passed as she bit back a chuckle as Applejack grabbed a bucket between her teeth and put it below the branch that sagged with the weight of delicious ripe apples. Blonde hair flew as the mare twisted suddenly and bucked the tree with all their might. Releasing the apples from the branch, they fell to the ground, completely missing the large bucket which had suddenly moved back to the cart. Applejack had been pulling with her. What the? She removed her Stetson as she wiped sweat from her brow with her dirty hooves. She eyed the bucket for a moment before shrugging it as she rounded up the loose apples and loaded them into the cart. She once again grabbed the bucket, pulling it to the next tree in her path and positioned it carefully under the tree. She turned, kicked the tree, and watched as once again the apples hit the dirt, completely missing the bucket, which had once again appeared hanging from the cart. The mare stomped the ground, sending dirt flying as she mumbled under her breath. She walked over, grabbed the bucket, and slammed it hard into the ground. She lowered her snout until she was eye level with the bucket and simply stared at it unblinkingly. She stared for several minutes until a thump sounded from just behind her. She jumped skittishly, letting out a nervous laugh as she saw an apple rolling across the ground. As the mare turned back, she screamed as the bucket was once again hanging from the cart. What in Celestia's name? Her eye started twitching, and she let loose an angry snort as she galloped off toward the barn in the distance. If she hadn't been so frustrated, she might have heard a certain unicorn rolling underneath an apple tree laughing her flank off. Twilight stood up with a grin, her horns sparkling as she dispelled the magic surrounding her. She quickly turned tail and hopped the fence onto the trail, dust kicking up as she ran toward the quarry, giggling madly. Twilight cantered back into town, slightly downcast. She had searched every inch of the quarry and couldn't find hide or scale of Spike and Rarity. The purple unicorn decided to stop by the Sugar Cube corner, grab a drink, and wait for Rarity to return to the Carousel Boutique. She trotted into the small bakery, smiling as a pink missile stopped inches from her face. Twilight! Pinkie yelled, almost darkly, in the poor unicorn's ears. Twilight flattened her ears, glaring at the generic pony for a moment, before breaking into a reluctant smile. Hi, Pinkie. Have you seen Spike? The mare just cocked her head and looked at Twilight strangely. Yes, he's a little baby dragon purple with a green belly about his tail, about this tall, she said as she sat back on her haunches, raising a single hoof. Twilight gritted her teeth silently before sighing. I meant, have you seen him today? Ooh, nope, she said, bouncing to the kitchen. Twilight just stared blankly, her eyes narrow for a moment, thinking quietly to herself. On her mental list of friends, Pinkie and Rainbow Dash rated the most deserving. A flare of magic later, the purple pony was once again invisible, slowly inching toward the kitchen. As she silently stepped through the doorway into the kitchen, she screamed as a bucket of water collapsed onto her, pouring water all over her. Before the poor wet mare could shiver, She was blinded by a cloud of pure white flour exploding in her face, covering the invisible pony in white. Ha! She stood still, shock freezing her in place, not even noticing a third pink pony laughing her head off. Twilight growled slightly before galloping out of the kitchen, wiping the flour from her body, and rendering herself visible with the help of her horn. She turned and silently locked the kitchen door before smiling as she eyed the room around her. The purple mare started moving objects here and there, setting up an elaborate trap for her pink-haired friend. Twilight smiled brightly as she nestled down behind the counter, eyeing the door patiently. She waited, and waited, and waited. "What are we waiting on?" a voice whispered from beside her. "I've set up a prank for Pinky. The moment she steps through the door, she'll kick a rope, which will drop an anvil on that scale, raising the other end that's weighed down with a candle burning through another rope." Pinky. "Yes, Twi?" the pink pony said, her eyes locked on the door before her. "How did you get out of the kitchen?" "I'm not sure." "Oh, yeah." Twilight stood suddenly, her flattening against her mane as she aggravatedly backed away from Pinky, straight into her own trap. The rope snapped, an anvil falling down onto a scale, which tipped under the heavy weight, raising the lit candle to a thin string. The candle burnt through the string quickly, releasing the spring-loaded catapult loaded with a messy cherry pie. Twilight had just enough time to realize she was in the middle of a very sticky mess before a pie exploded across her face, throwing messy red chunks into her mane. She stood still for a moment, fighting to ignore the stifled giggling. She slowly lifted a hood and wiped cherries filling out of her eyes, glaring at Pinky. "I hope you know," she trailed off, magically cleaning her face once again. "This means war," she said quietly, her eyes on fire. With a pop, the unicorn vanished, reappearing on the other side of the counter, quickly making herself invisible. She quietly looked over the counter, looking for a Pinkie Pie, only to see a miniature castle in the middle of the bakery. Pinkie's eyes could be seen peeking over the wall of the small castle. Black paint under her eyes, with a camouflage helmet upon her head. Twilight narrowed her eyes, levitating several pies behind her before launching them over the counter, a whistling sound echoing through the air. Twilight heard Pinkie scream, "Return fire!" before ducking below the counter, which was instantly assaulted with chocolate cupcakes. The purple mare retaliated with an airstrike of frosting bombs, raining sugary shells down on her sworn pink enemy. 3 hours later. The bakery was a mess, frosting caked every surface, and numerous wrappers dotted the battle-scarred landscape. The small castle lay in ruin, and even the counter was missing several sizable chunks, taken out by Pinkie's destructive chili cakes. Twilight and Pinkie sat at the one remaining table in the bakery, poring over the quickly drawn-up ceasefire. Twilight had already signed it with a magical flourish and was merely waiting on Pinkie to pick up the pen and sign the treaty, effectively ending the battle. Finally, Pinkie signed the treaty after clarifying several key points of the treaty and finding them to all be agreeable terms. Pinkie stood, pushing her chair back behind her as she stretched out her hoof, a goofy grin on her face. Twilight bit back a grin as she stretched out her arm in return, quickly grabbing her pink friend's hoof. Pinkie's hair shot into the air, an electrified sizzle crackling through the air. Twilight burst out laughing as she rolled her hoof over, showing an electrified Pinkie her joy buzzer. "I got you!" Twilight screamed, laughing as she looked around at the bakery for the first time. "Wow, we really did a number on the sugar cube, didn't we?" Twilight laughed, biting her lip worriedly. "Yeah, we really did." Pinkie, on the other hand, seemed to love to save the bakery. She was currently licking frosting off the wall until her cheeks bulged with sugar. "I guess we better get cleaning," Twilight said, sagging slightly at the immense mess before her. "No, I've got this." Pinkie started bouncing around the room, her tongue sliding over everything she could lick, and within moments the entire room was sparkling clean, albeit spit-covered. Somehow the earth pony had even repaired the chunks of counter missing, leaving Twilight amazed and slightly queasy. "How did you—" "Never mind." Oh, Pinky, I'm going to head home to see if Spike's returned yet. Twilight said, giggling slightly as Pinky bounced around the room. Alright, Twi, I need to start the next batch of cupcakes for the bakery since we kind of used them all as ammunition, she said, giggling. Twilight waved goodbye as she turned and trotted out the door. The purple mare smiled as she finally spotted Rarity, who had just stepped into her boutique. She ran across the street before knocking on the door slightly. From inside the building, Twilight heard her friend call out, "Just a moment, please." Twilight could hear the faint clop of hooves coming closer to the door, and suddenly the door was pulled open, revealing the smiling form of a white pony. "Oh, why, hello, Twilight, darling. I was just coming to see you." The pony stood back, beckoning inside with her head. Twilight stepped inside, smiling as Spike came running to her from where he'd been laying on Rarity's couch, watching the word. "Why?" The little purple dragon's face lit up as he saw his best friend walk into the room. "I was so scared when I couldn't find you yesterday, and there was some kind of ghost in the library," he said, shivering slightly, thinking about it again. "Oh, Spike," Twilight giggled. "That wasn't a ghost, that was me, you silly dragon. I discovered a new spell and was testing it when you walked in." Spike stood still for a minute before looking at Rarity with a sheepish grin. Rarity raised a brow at the small dragon. "Big horrible ghost? You had to fight several of them off with your flame breath," Rarity said, stifling a large grin. The two mares shared a laugh as the poor dragon before them turned a bright red, refusing to look at either of the ponies before him. He blushed wildly and slowly edged out of the room. "Oh, that poor dear. I hope I didn't embarrass him too much. I actually thought he was quite cute with the stories he had told me about how he had lost track of you after fighting off several large ghosts," Rarity said, looking out into the foyer of her boutique. "Oh, he'll be fine, Rarity. Thank you for keeping track of him. Did he sleep here last night?" she asked, gazing closely at the design on Rarity's newest dress. If she had been paying attention, she might have noticed a slight blush go over Rarity's face. "Oh, yes, he stayed here last night. He was too scared to go back home and couldn't find you yesterday." "Did he sleep on the couch?" Twilight asked, looking for a blanket or a pillow. Rarity began blushing harder and quickly grabbed a small bunny-sized sweater from the design rack. "Do you think you could drop this at Flutter's for me, dear?" she asked, levitating the small sweater to the purple unicorn. "I've been meaning to take it over to her for several days, but I've just been so busy with my new designs." "Oh, yes, I can do that for you," the mare agreed, smiling. She took the small sweater from Rarity and tucked it into her saddlebag. "Is it for Angel?" "Oh, yes. You know how Fluttershy loves that aggressive little miscreant." "Thank you, dearie. I'm sorry to seem rushed, but I simply must get back to this dress," the white pony said, brushing her mane over her shoulder as she gave the dress a critical eye. "Well, it's very beautiful, Rarity. I'll be going now. And if you see Spike before I do, tell him I expect him home tonight, please," Twilight said, without looking behind her as she made her way out the door, off in the direction of Fluttershy's. Behind her, Rarity watched the unicorn leave before calling out, "Spiky, you can come out now. She's gone." Oh, yes. The first chapter, I believe. Yes. The first chapter was quite intriguing. Like if you enjoyed it. Comment what you think about it. Like, for example, comment if you want me to do more of these, or comment what game I should play, or if I should actually get a webcam of me doing this. I mean, it's fine. I might get a webcam soon, but it's depending. It might be as of Sunday or somewhere else. But I will see you guys later. Bye.